If I told you that the Ten Commandments movie influenced the Liquid Terminator in Terminator 2, you'd probably look at me like I was crazy. And if I told you that there was a Disney movie in the middle of all of that that was a key trigger, you probably wouldn't believe it. And that is exactly why I made this video today. I'm going to take you through 5 invisible string connections you never knew about with Disney. Okay. I will start with the Terminator 2 connection because honestly, it's the one that triggered this entire video for me and I find it fascinating. Here we go. Invisible string number 1. All the way back in 1956, there was a child named Randall Kleiser. And Randall was watching the Ten Commandments movie on TV and was absolutely captivated by some of the special effects in that movie, specifically the part where Moses parted the Red Sea. Randall was so inspired that he decided to make it his life's mission to work in the film industry, and he absolutely did that. He went to the University of Southern California and was able to rub shoulders with the likes of George Lucas, whose film he actually appeared in, the student film Freiheit. Randall also lived in the house that George Lucas was renting at that time, so there's just like a weird turn there. I guess that's kind of a Disney connection now that Star Wars is part of Disney, but that's not where I'm going with this. Randall would graduate film school and go on to work on some pretty major motion pictures like Grease, The Blue Lagoon, and even Summer Lovers with Brooke Shields. But in the 1980s, Disney hired Randall Kleiser to work on a film called Flight of the Navigator. If you are a fan of Flight of the Navigator, I need you to drop it in the comments or like this video or something, because I am a massive fan. That was one of my favorite movies growing up as a kid, and I find that so few people have actually seen it. Every time I mention it, people are like, what is that? And I have to explain to them this absolute masterpiece of a film. But I'm digressing. So Disney hires Randall Kleiser to direct The Flight of the Navigator. Randall has had this lifelong obsession with CGI and special effects, and he finally has the perfect movie to really put some of his skills to use. He decided he wanted to create a chrome mirror-like spaceship for Flight of the Navigator. Every single person in Hollywood that he talked to told him it was an awful idea. It was the 1980s at the time. Technology wasn't as advanced as it was today, and everybody said that you would see the cameras and the reflection. It would be incredibly hard to edit out. It was just a bad decision. And Randall looked at all of them and he said, I don't care. I'm doing it anyway. Randall put all of his CGI and special effects skills to use and would create the chrome mirror-like spaceship that he always dreamed of for Flight of the Navigator. Wow, how did you do that? Now, the movie itself wasn't maybe the biggest hit of the time, but the special effects that were used to create this were pretty advanced. And Randall did get a lot of kudos from his fellow directors and producers for taking the risk and making this chrome mirror-like spaceship happen. The thing is, when Randall was approaching all of his Hollywood friends and directors and producers and asked them what they thought about this chrome mirror-like spaceship, one of the people he approached was none other than James Cameron. After the success of the special effects used to create that spaceship, James Cameron would go on to admit that it was the spaceship in Flight of the Navigator that inspired him to create the Liquid Terminator, or otherwise known as the T-1000 in Terminator 2. The next invisible string I'm going to take you on is a little bit of a journey, but stick with me because we're going to get there in the end. Back in 1931, a woman by the name of Mary Brown Robinson won a scholarship to the Chouinard Art Institute. While attending the institute, she made friends with a woman named Preston Blair, whose brother was Lee Everett Blair, whom Mary would go on to marry. With the support from her new husband and sister-in-law, she went to the California School of Watercolor, where she became quite known for a very specific art style. Going now by the name of Mary Blair, she would work first for MGM Studios before moving with her husband over to UB Iwerks Studios. If you're a diehard Disney fan, these names are probably starting to stand out just a little bit in your head, but I'm going somewhere with this, and it's not where you expect, I promise. UB Iwerks we'll get into in another invisible string, so I'm not going to dive too much into it. However, all you need to know right now is that Mary Blair was working at UB Iwerks and eventually transitioned over to Disney. While working at Disney, she worked on films like Dumbo, Lady and the Tramp, also working on some bits of Fantasia. However, after working there for some time, she started to feel artistically restrained and just unsatisfied with her work in general, so she decided to take a leave of absence. During the same time, tensions had been growing for decades between North America and South America, Latin America. When Roosevelt was elected president in 1933, he put in place something called the Good Neighbor Policy. This policy was basically trying to just stabilize the relationship between America and its partners, South America and Latin America. At a time where world tensions were constantly increasing, Roosevelt wanted to make sure that we had a good neighbor. Literally. One of the most famous efforts under the Good Neighbor Policy was a cultural exchange. Part of that cultural exchange included Walt Disney and some of his team heading to South America in around 1941. This just so happened to line up with the exact time that Mary was taking her break, and so she decided to go on this trip to South America with Walt and the rest of the team. It was in South America where Mary's energy kind of woke back up inside of her. The vibrant colors, the folk art, the architecture, everything that she was surrounded by, even down to the children of the villages they visited, was inspiring to her. I cannot emphasize to you enough how much this visit to South America inspired Mary's future work. This new artistic style would become the biggest influence in her career, and that art style would carry on through Disney to films like Cinderella, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, and most notably, she was a key designer on It's a Small World. So had we not had tension with South America and Latin America at that time, Franklin Roosevelt might have never enacted the good policy, Mary might have just stayed uninspired for the rest of her life. We may not have It's a Small World and the entire art style that inspired decades worth of Disney films. For all my Epcot fans out there, this one is for you. Aside from Cinderella's castle, perhaps the most well-known landmark at Disney World is the Epcot golf ball, as most people call it.
Who do you think the hottest girl in school is? The Epcot ball? Well, I like Melanie, and not just because she's pretty. I think she's really funny.
What you might not know is the reason that we have the Epcot ball is because of one man's existential crisis, and that man never even met Walt Disney. There was a man standing on the edge of a very frozen Lake Michigan, contemplating his entire existence. He was living in a slum in Chicago, he was facing bankruptcy for a failed business, and he was actively grieving the death of his young daughter. It was on the frozen shores of Lake Michigan that Buckminster Fuller had an existential crisis that triggered a chain of events that led us to the Epcot Ball. After having this existential crisis, Buckminster Fuller would go on to isolate himself for an entire year. He wanted to contemplate basically what was the meaning of life, and he came up with the idea for Spaceship Earth. His Spaceship Earth, however, was not a ride inside of a ball inside of an amusement park in the swamp of Florida. He began to ask himself a strange question. Imagine waking up aboard a spaceship. It has limited food. It has limited water. You have limited fuel and limited support systems. On top of all of that, you have a crew that has to cooperate for survival. Your immediate thought wouldn't be, let's divide up into factions and see how much damage we can do to this ship. His point in all of this was that Earth already functions as a spaceship, so why don't we just treat it that way? And thus the idea of Spaceship Earth was born. Part of this epiphany that came to him and the idea of Spaceship Earth was this geodesic dome. It was a series of interconnected triangles that created a dome-like structure over anything, really. Starting to sound familiar? Do you guys remember when we had to build a bridge out of like balsa wood, and then like in science class in middle school, and then they would test it by hanging weights from it, and everybody always came to the conclusion that the triangle is the strongest shape? Basically, that's where this is going. A dome that's made of interconnected triangles would be like incredibly strong. It didn't use as much material as people thought it would, could survive snow, wind, and protect everything inside from like horrific weather. Buckminster Fuller would go on to write a novel called The Operation Manual for Spaceship Earth. And even at that point, there is zero connection between him and what he's doing and Disney. His idea and his novel had gained traction at this point though, and he was picked up to help design the US Pavilion at the 1967 World's Fair. I'm sure I'm putting some of it on screen right now, but the dome that he built for the 1967 World's Fair basically looks like the Epcot ball, just without a bottom. And a fun little fact, that structure still stands today as the Montreal Biosphere. The original acrylic covering and whatnot got destroyed, I think in like 1976, but the like steel framework of it still exists. It's at this point that Buckminster Fuller becomes a worldwide known name. His work on the US Pavilion at the 1967 World's Fair put a spotlight on him and his ideas as a whole. It was with the inspiration from the geodesic dome from the World's Fair, as well as the concept of a Spaceship Earth, that the Disney Imagineers brought Spaceship Earth at Disney to life. I think the Disney Imagineers did consult with Fuller on the construction of the dome and the idea of Spaceship Earth a little bit, but they basically took his ideas and created their own version of it that they could put inside of a theme park. Had Buckminster Fuller not been at this incredibly low point in his life, the idea and concept of Spaceship Earth, both his novel, The Geodesic Dome, and eventually Spaceship Earth at Disney World, would never have come to life. So the next time you're at Epcot and you're riding Spaceship Earth, instead of thanking the Phoenicians, or perhaps in addition to thanking the Phoenicians, thank Buckminster Fuller. This next one's kind of fun. What if I told you that the only reason we have Winnie the Pooh today is because of World War I? In 1887, a child by the name of Harry Colborne was born in Birmingham. I couldn't find a direct reason why, but Harry wanted to be a veterinarian. Hello, I'm editing. I got this wrong. I was double checking my facts while I was editing this video. So Harry actually moved to Canada before he attended veterinary school. He moved to Canada when he was 18 and then lived there for a bit and then went to veterinary school. He did
graduate in 1911, and he did go to the Royal Veterinary College, but that wasn't until after the war. So just, I was wrong. I got it wrong. So, okay, anyway, back to the video.
He emigrated to Canada and became a veterinarian there. This was right around the time of World War I, and even though Harry was living in Canada, there was a need for any type of doctor. So Harry, being the great guy that he is, volunteers his services for the Canadian military. And in 1914, he was traveling east to join the troops when he stopped in White River. It was in White River that he bought a female cub from a hunter for $20. At this time, Winnipeg was his home, and so he decided to name this bear Winnie after Winnipeg. At first, Winnie was traveling with the military and kind of became like a mascot for them at the time, which must have been absolutely adorable. I personally would definitely take a bullet to save a baby bear cub, but maybe that's just me. But because this was World War I, Harry was eventually sent to the front lines in France to help with wounded soldiers, and he knew that it was just not a good idea to take Winnie with him there. He knew she wouldn't survive. There was no way that they could protect her amongst everything else that was happening, and so he left Winnie in the care of the London Zoo, hoping to retrieve her once the war was done. While Coleman was helping out on the front lines, Winnie slowly became one of the most popular attractions at the London Zoo, primarily because of her temperament with children and people. Because her temperament was so mild, children were allowed to interact with her. One of those children was a boy named Christopher Robin Milne. You're probably picking up where this is going at this point, but Christopher visited Winnie so often that he named his own teddy bear Winnie. Christopher's father, A.A. Milne, became the author of Christopher Robin, Winnie the Pooh, and that whole series. Maybe this invisible string isn't quite so invisible as some of the others, but if you think about it, if Harry Coleman had never decided to become a veterinarian, he never would have moved to Canada, he never would have lived in Winnipeg specifically, he never would have volunteered to help the Canadian forces, he never would have been in White River on his way to join the forces, he never would have bought this cub for $20, who then became very well accustomed to being with humans. Had he never been sent to France, he never would have donated or asked the London Zoo to watch over Winnie for him. Christopher Robin would have never interacted with Winnie, he never would have named his teddy bear after her, and then we may never have gotten Winnie the Pooh. It amazes me how perfectly series of events have to line up in order for things to happen that become these cultural giants. The last invisible string that I have for you today is possibly one of the most influential things that has ever happened to Disney ever. I may be stretching it a little bit with that, but hear me out. One of the most mundane things that can happen at Disney World or Disneyland today, a child asking for a character's autograph, nearly caused the downfall of the Disney Animation Studio in 1929. And the near downfall of Disney Animation Studios in 1929 is what eventually caused some massive technological advances that allowed Disney to create the animation style that we know and love. I told you earlier that we would be returning to UB iWorks in some way, and this is the time where we do.
Hello, editing Emily here again. You can tell time has passed because my face is greasy and the light has changed. I spend this entire time calling him UB iWorks. I think his name is actually pronounced Oob, so I think it's Oob iWorks, not UB. I'm very sorry. I don't know how I missed that, but I'm very sorry I mispronounced his name this entire time, but I wanted you to know before you venture on with this section that his name is actually pronounced Oob and not UB iWorks. Sorry.
UB iWorks and Disney met back in 1919 when they were both working for a small film studio, I think in Kansas, if I remember correctly, but that doesn't really matter. After working together for quite some time, they decided to kind of start their own venture. They worked for and with each other in some aspect for the next 10 years, and UB iWorks was the animator for Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. You probably know about the legal issues surrounding Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and how that eventually led to the creation of Mickey Mouse. But did you know that UB iWorks was the one that drew Mickey Mouse? Maybe that's common knowledge, but I thought Walt drew Mickey Mouse. I thought he did. Disney was the front man, Disney was the face, Disney was the businessman, and UB iWorks being the animator and the artist, he just fell behind and people did not know his name nearly as much as they knew Walt Disney's. And now we get to the crux of the story. It was 1929 and Walt and UB iWorks were out maybe at a dinner or something like that when a young child approached Walt Disney and asked for his autograph. Walt took the napkin from the child and handed it to UB iWorks and said, "Here, why don't you draw Mickey Mouse and I'll sign it." Now, already feeling jaded by the lack of recognition, this was just the straw that broke the camel's back for UB iWorks. And in 1930, he broke away from Disney, taking some of the best animators and the music director with him. Now, this was a setback for Disney. Obviously, he recovered given where everything is today, but at the time, UB iWorks separating from the company and taking with him his skills, a lot of the animators and artists that were at Disney at the time and their music director was a massive blow to the production that that Disney had set up. There was a short period of confusion and struggling while they tried to get their feet placed after UB Iwerks left. And again, obviously they recovered, but at the time, it was kind of sketchy. UB Iwerks went on to create his own animation studios and produced a few things, but it eventually failed, and he rejoined Disney in 1940. He was originally brought back into Disney as an animation checker, but he and Walt sat down and kind of hashed things out, had a little heart-to-heart, and that was when UB Iwerks told Disney about his passion for engineering and cameras. Hearing all of this, Walt then hired him on as the head of a new department called the Special Processes and Cameras Department. This is where UB Iwerks went on to help with the creation of the multiplane camera, among several other technological advances. Most notably, he went on to invent the optical printer, which changed animation completely at the time. It gave people the ability to print film cells in a more sophisticated manner, which was massive and like a huge time saver. We could go so far as to say that 101 Dalmatians would not exist today as we know it had none of this happened, because UB Iwerks went on to help with the invention of xerography for film cells. I am not familiar enough with film technology to tell you exactly how that works. I'm sure there's another YouTube video out there that goes into the actual camera mechanics a bit more. But had none of this happened, that technology was used so much in the production of 101 Dalmatians that it's very possible the movie would have never existed had none of this happened. So somewhere out there is a napkin from 1929 that has a drawing of Mickey Mouse and Walt Disney's signature on it. And that napkin changed the course of Disney history. And that brings me to the end of the 5 invisible strings that you probably didn't know existed in tandem with Disney, or like involving Disney, basically. I absolutely love finding these invisible strings. It's captivating to click back and back and back and back and find where things started. So I can guarantee this is not the last video that I'm going to do like this. In fact, I'm probably going to make several more because I just get fascinated with this stuff. So if you enjoyed my ramblings, or you learned something new, or now you have a fun tidbit to share at your next dinner party, if anybody does those these days, give this video a like, and if you want, you can subscribe because I'm going to do more videos like this in the future. So let me know what you thought. If you have any questions, let me know and I can try to answer them, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!